Okay, good evening. And tonight's shiur is Lilu Nishmat Avi Mori Dov Ber Meir Ben Ruven Halevi Imi Marati Rachel Bat Harav Michael, and for Shlema for Chana Kayla Bat Sarah Leah, Liz Kruger Shaver for Shlema. And tonight we're talking about Metzora or Tzarat Part 2. Because this year is a leap year, we get to read Tazria and Metzora separately, as opposed to reading them together, which we would have done had it been a leap year. And the first part, I guess the first two-thirds of Parsha Metzora continues the theme of Tzarat. The last third talks about other types of Tum'ah. And I forgot that I thought I'd mentioned it last week, and then when I went over and listened, I realized I had left out one of the key components that we when we talk about Tumah and Tara, we have to understand that the primary relationship of Tumah and Tara deals with the Beit HaMikdash and deals with eating things that are sanctified, whether they are Truma or they are Karbanot, and entering the Beit HaMikdash or entering the entering the precincts of Beit HaMikdash or entering Har HaBayit, certain areas on Har HaBayit where we cannot enter, even if we are not planning on entering the Beit HaMikdash proper. There are areas on Har HaBayit where one cannot approach in certain types of Tum'ah. So today, most of the laws of Tumah and Tahara, we don't necessarily practice to the same extent that we would be practicing them if we had a Beit HaMikdash, unless you are one of those people who happens to frequent Har HaBayit, in which case you might be concerned with these types of halachot. Having said that, we will resume with our laws of Tzarat. As I said last week, Tzarat is this malady that has physical manifestations, but is clearly not intended to be a medical condition that can be healed by general medicine or medical practices. I said last week that the key theme word of the parsha is HaKohen. And again, this week, one of the theme words of the parsha is once again HaKohen. The Kohen appears prominently throughout all of the stages of Tzarat, whether it is diagnosis, whether it is cure, and ultimately, as we read in the beginning of this week's parsha, the re-entry of the person who has had Tzarat following the cure of the malady, his re-entry into a society, and then re-entering into being able to re-enter the Beit HaMikdash. And if we look at the first portion of this week's parsha, it deals exclusively with that. We begin the parsha with Zot Tiyet Torat HaMetzora B'Yom Taharato. This is the law of the Metzora. The person has had this affliction, this skin affliction, B'Yom Taharato, on the day that he becomes pure. Now it's interesting. We talked about last week that it is, even though you may know you've got Tzarat, you do not become Tameh until a Kohen sees you and declares you Tameh. Similarly, once you have been declared Tameh, you cannot become Tahor until a Kohen declares you Tahor. So the first thing that the Kohen has to do is declare you Tahor, and in order for the Kohen to do that, he must see you. So the first thing one does when he realizes it is B'Yom Tarato, on the day he has been cured, V'huva el HaKohen. He is brought to the Kohen. Now, I would have thought it should have said V'uba el HaKohen. He should come to the Kohen. And the Parshanim say that no, that's V'huva el HaKohen is to teach us that even if the person has been healed, says, I've had it, I'm not going to Beit HaMikdash anytime soon anyway, I'm perfectly happy to stay Tameh, he is brought to the Kohen even against his will, because once he has been cured, he is supposed to be seen by the Kohen. The next pasuk seems a very, very strange pasuk, because it gives with the words V'yatzah HaKohen. The Kohen has to go out. Now, if the Metzora, this cured person, has been brought to the Kohen, where's the Kohen going out of? And why does it seem from these two psukim almost as if each of them has to go out, and one is brought to the Kohen, but the Kohen has to come out to meet him, it seems. And Rav Hirsch, Sam Raphael Hirsch tells us that if we look through the laws of Tzara'at and we try to understand the implications thereof, one of the possible implications of this, each of them having to go out of their natural location, is to each teach each of them a lesson. The Kohen is to understand that they have a job to reach out to those that need spiritual healing. That's one of the lessons of the Yatzah Kohen. The Kohen has to be willing to go out. The Kohen can't sit back and say, well, he's the one who's Tameh, I'll just sit back and wait till he decides to show up. No, the Yatzah Kohen, the Kohen has to be proactive and go out and be willing to go out and meet people and help them with their spiritual journey. That's one of the key functions of the Kohen that we talked about before with the Karbanot, where the Kohen has to be an active participant in helping the person achieve his reconnection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, reconnection to the sanctuary through the various Karbanot and the various processes that a person who has become Tameh has to go through. For the person being brought to the Kohen, it's to teach them, A, that the Kohen doesn't come to him because he is the one who has sinned. He is the one who has to seek out the Kohen. He has to be willing to seek out spiritual healing. It's not enough to sit back and say, well, I'll wait till the rabbi decides to come to visit me and then maybe I'll think about doing tshuva or becoming a better person or whatever. You have to take an active role in your own spiritual growth. You can't sit back and wait, say, oh, the Kohen will come to me. Another reason given possibly why the Kohen does not come all the way out and each have to go out is, had the person come to the Kohen, he might have felt too overwhelmed, and that would have made the Kohen feel unable to be able to connect him. The fact that the Kohen meets him, quote, halfway, it enables each of them to fulfill their role. Neither of them feels put upon, and that neither of them will get a feeling of haughtiness, see how important I am. Each of them realizes that their role is dependent on the other, and they need to work at this mutually together in order to strengthen each the individual who is healing, as well as strengthening him as a member of Klal Yisrael, and that's the primary job of the Kohen. Now, again, same phrase we had last week. V'ra Kohen, again, the Kohen has to see. He cannot take the person who has tzarat or the local rabbi's word for it. He has to physically be able to see. As a matter of fact, it's brought down halacha that if the Kohen has any visual problems, any visual impairment, he can't be on duty as the tzarat checking Kohen. He's got to be able to have, I don't know whether it's 20/20 vision in each eye or 6/6, depending on which you do, but he has to have good enough vision to be able to see and discern the different types of tzarat and the different types of whether they have healed or not. So that's a critical component of the job of the Kohen. And interestingly enough, if we look through this week's parsha, probably more than last week's parsha, where it seemed the Kohen was either looking, declaring somebody tameh, or declaring somebody tahor. That was basically all the Kohen was doing. In this week's parsha, the Kohen has a much more varied role of the verbs that precede this word ha-Kohen. So if we look here, even in the first few psukim, we have v'yatzah Kohen, he has to go out. V'ra'ah Kohen, he has to see. V'tzivah Kohen, the Kohen gives the instructions. And later on, we're going to see v'lakacha Kohen. A lot of times the Kohen will be taking. He will be taking from the blood. He'll be taking ultimately from all sorts of different things to do different parts of the service that he has to do to help bring the Metzora, the Tzarua back into the congregation. Now, the Torah is going to describe what I call a two-stage process for a Metzora who has healed. Unlike other tumot, certain tumot, you become tameh because you got in contact with a dead animal or a animal that contaminates or some other types of tumah. Later on, we'll see other types of tumah. You go to the mikvah, you're purified. The next morning, you just have to wait till the time elapses. The exceptions are tamei meit and tumat tzarat are the exceptions, in that there is a two-stage process of reentry. So the first stage in the case of the paraduma or tumat mate, the stage one is you have to be sprinkled with the ashes of the paraduma, and then after the end of your 7-day period where you were sprinkled with the ashes on the 3rd day and the 7th day after you had become tameh, then you can go to the mikveh and be pure the next day. With the case of Tarat, again, we're going to have this 7-day period, but here there's no sprinkling per se of the ashes of paraduma twice. Here we're going to have a procedure that is done on the day that he becomes tahor, and then he has to wait 7 days. And the procedure seems to us very, very strange. As we're told in Pasuk Dalet, the procedure begins with the person taking, or the Kohen taking on behalf of the person, the following items. Shtei tiparim, 2 live birds. They have to be tahor. They have to be birds that are tahor. And then he takes an 8 erez, a piece of cedar wood. Shti tolat, a piece of red dyed wool. A zov, a sprig of hyssop. Now, those 3 things, by the way, 8 erez, shti tolat, bezov, if we had studied the laws of paraduma, we would have recognized them. Wait, those are the exact same 3 things we throw in when we do the purification of the paraduma. If we were studying about Pesach, we would recognize a zov, because a zov was what the Bnei Yisrael in Pesach, when they were in Mitzrayim, when they were leaving Mitzrayim, they had to take a zov to dip into the blood to spread over the doorposts and the lintel where before they were leaving Egypt. So some of these symbolic things that we're taking, we seem to have already come across in different contexts. But if we look through again, the symbolism of these, 8 eras, cedar tree is the mightiest perhaps of all of vegetation, whereas azov is one of the lowest vegetation. It's a lowly bush. So perhaps Rav Hirsch wants to suggest, as others suggest other reasons, but Rav Hirsch suggests that this is to represent that we need to be aware of the entire creation of God, from the plant kingdom, lowest to the plant to the highest, and the Shnei Tolat, which is a combination of wool which comes from an animal, and a red dye that is made from a worm. We get this concept of, again, the animal kingdom. You got to think from the highest order to the lowest order, that each of these are all God's creation, and you, by distancing yourself from God to cause him to give you this affliction, have disrupted the natural order of the world from top to bottom. And now you've got to go and try to repair this by using all of these things to make you cognizant of your shortcoming that you've now hopefully repaired, otherwise you wouldn't have been cured, but to remind you that you have to keep on the straight and narrow going forward. This is not something that you can forget about and just leave. You've got to keep up this new way, this new path that you have reached because of your introspection during your Tarat. You've got to keep it up. It's not just, okay, I went on my diet, lost my weight, now I can go back to my old eating habits and gain it all back again. You can't do that here. You've got to stay the course, and you've got to learn the new way of life that you've adopted so that you can stay clear, free and clear and healthy. Okay, now the process is one other ingredient involved, and that here is when we take the tzipor, that one of these 2 birds is going to get slaughtered, the other is going to ultimately sent away, which, by the way, Rav Hirsch tells us we find very reminiscent of the 2 goats on Yom Kippur, where one is slaughtered, one is sent away. As a matter of fact, the Gemara, when it discusses the laws of Tarat, tells us the same thing that it tells us about these 2 goats, that they have to be alike in appearance, in stature, and they should preferably be acquired at the same time. At the same time we acquire them. So that applies both to these 2 birds and to the 2 goats on Yom Kippur. Again, it's not ma'akev. If you didn't do it that way, it doesn't stop the ceremony from happening, but that's the preferred way. Again, it's the symbolism of that. We are composite people. We have 2 different sides to us, and we have to basically slaughter the negative side and or agree to slaughter our negative impulses so that our we can continue on with our positive way. That's, I think, one of the symbolisms of the 2 birds, the 2 goats on Yom Kippur. So again, we have a lot of parallels to other ceremonies in this ceremony, in this part one ceremony. The other, as I said, the other commonality is this mayim chayim. Okay, we have the other phrase. The other time the phrase mayim chayim appears is also in the purification. After you've taken the paraduma, you've burned it, you've got ashes. The ashes have to be poured, have to be mixed with mayim chayim before they can be sprinkled upon a person. So again, mayim chayim, just translation, flowing spring water, as opposed to water from a mikvah, water from the tap. It has to be from a flowing body of water that is constantly renewed. This concept again of mayim chayim seems to be very clear. The concept that why are they called mayim chayim? Because they're reminding us that we are now re-entering into society, into life, and going back to the way we're supposed to be. We should have been living all along. The basic procedure here is described in Pasuk Vav. He has to take the living bird with all of the other things, the cedar, the hyssop, tied together in a bundle with the red string, and take all of them, dip them into the blood of the slaughtered bird together with the water that is mixed with the water. And then from this mixture, he has to take and sprinkle on the purified person who's becoming purified 7 times. Again, similar, as I said, to the sprinkling of the mayim chayim of the water with the paraduma. And again, this completes, and then he sends the living bird is sent away, not like the shiur, which is sent to Bamidbar. Here it's sent up in Asadeh. It's just sent off free to go about its way, as opposed to the scapegoat, which is thrown off a cliff, the second of the goats. But again, the parallels, as we see, to these two procedures, to the Yom Kippur purification, to the purification from Tumat Mate of the Paraduma, are clearly, they seem to be very, very prominent, to the extent that we realize that there are a lot of similarities in trying to return to our state of purity vis-a-vis the Beit HaMikdash, and of course, vis-a-vis our relationship with God. And both of those are the aspects that we are trying, the Kohen is, and the process is trying to impress on this person who has had tzaraat. And now, the process continues after they sent the bird away by the Mitaher, changes his clothes, and then he has a very interesting thing, excuse me, the Gilach et kol se'aro. He has to shave all of the hair on his body, and he should wash. Then he goes to the mikveh and he becomes pure. But again, this is a chayav olam hachaneh. Then he can return to society. He still cannot return to Beit HaMikdash. And as a matter of fact, even though he has now been purified of the tzaraat stage 1, he still has to remain apart from his family for another week. And then after the other week comes by, once again, he repeats the procedure of shaving all of his hair. At Rosho, Zekano, Gabot Einav, all of his hair. The Chibeset Bigodav again changes his clothes. And then he goes to mikveh again, and he is now purified stage 1.5. He's completed stage 1. He's ready for stage 2. And the second entry into the mikveh is now at the end of this 7-day period of anticipation of returning to purity, full purity, and that begins with Yom HaShmini. Now, on Yom HaShmini, we have 2 different options here, and that all depends on, to finish and complete stage 2, he has to bring a series of karbanot, and it depends on his level of his wealth. Okay, if he is wealthy enough to afford it, he brings 2 lambs, 2 male sheep, 1 female sheep, and he brings a korban which has 3 tenths of an ephah of flour mixed with oil. And in addition to the oil of the korban, he has to bring 1 log of oil. So these are things he has to bring. Now, interestingly enough, if he is poor, and I tried to put these side by side so you can see the comparisons between the 2. In the case of the poor person, he still has to bring one keves as an asham. That's the minimum animal he has to bring, is he has to bring at least one keves as an asham. And he also has to bring, in this case, he only brings 1/10 of an ephah as a mincha, but he also has to bring this log shemen. So in other words, it's basically the mincha that he's bringing, the meal offering he's bringing, is 1 ephah per animal. In the case of the person who can afford it, who brings 3 sheep, he brings 3/10 of an ephah. The person who can't afford it, who has to bring 1 sheep, he only brings 1/10 of an ephah. But in each case, they have to bring a log shemen. The poor person can substitute for the other 2 animals. He can substitute shtei torimo shnei b'nei yonah. Now, this is very reminiscent of what we call the korban olav yored, other offerings where the value of the offering or what you have to bring is dependent on your financial well-being. Again, because God does not want us not to be able to purify ourselves, to use our poverty as an excuse for not being able to reestablish our relationship. Because Kadosh Baruch Hu, as we've seen before in many of the aspects of the Karbanot, Kadosh Baruch Hu wants us to come closer to him. The whole purpose of the Karbanot is to allow us to, and by putting a financial burden on somebody who's trying to return to Hashem would be counterproductive. So that's why there is this second option for the poorer person. And in the case of the korban olav yored, there's even a third option for the super poor person. In this case, there's no third option for the super poor person. There's only the very wealthy and the not so wealthy. Anyway, if we go through the procedure again here, you'll notice very, very similarly. Firstly, of course, the prominence of the Kohen. The Kohen has to be involved in each step of the way. He's brought lifnei Hashem petach o moed. He has to be before Hashem, but he is not allowed to enter the sanctuary yet, even though he's been through his 7-day procedure. He's been through the first procedure with the birds. He's been through his 7-day waiting period. He is still not allowed until his offerings are brought to enter the sanctuary. This is why even here the Kohen meets him petach o moed. He is met at the gate, at the entrance to the Pet Ohel Moed. He is not allowed to enter. As a matter of fact, the Kohen is going to have to stand inside and sprinkle blood and oil on the Metzora, on the different parts of his body. And then, only then, after the Karbanot are brought, is he able to re-enter the sanctuary. And that's this whole procedure here. So again, he takes one of the, let's go here, he takes one of the kvasim in the case where there are 3 of the wealthy person. In the case of the one who has 1, he takes that keves, he brings it up as a korban, slaughters it, it takes the dam, and he has to put the blood on the right earlobe, the right big toe, the right thumb and the right big toe of the person who has tzara'at. Now, if you get tzara'at and you've had your foot amputated, you are in deep trouble. If you had your big toe amputated, you've had your thumb amputated, you've had your ear amputated, you're in trouble. Only if it's the right one, by the way. If it's the left one, you're okay. All right. But in any of these cases, you're going to be in trouble because you may or may, in time of English, you would not have been able to be purified because the procedure requires these things, although there's an opinion that says it's only the place. If you have a stump there, you're okay. But again, the procedure, this is why firstly, we use right rather than left, as we talked about previously in the Beit HaMikdash, that the coin had to be right-handed, that everything is to the right because the right represents strength, and we have to dedicate our strength to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Here in this case, the thumb, the big toe, the ear are all prominent. Again, the ear, we hear, the hand is what we work with, the toe is how we get to places. The big one is the selected one to represent the entire hand, foot, ear. And these are how we as human beings are distinguished from the animal kingdom, and we have to learn to use these tools properly. That's exactly what this whole process is all about, reminding you that you have to use the gifts HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you in the proper way. If we fail to understand that, then we've missed the whole purpose of this process, and probably you're going to have to go through it again if we don't, because we will not understand that we've got to stay the course here. As I said before, you can't just revert back to your old behavior. You're going to have to continue with this procedure. Okay. After the Kohen has sprinkled the blood on these three places, the Kohen then takes from the oil and does the same exact thing, except the oil is a little bit interesting. He has to pour it from the container in which it was brought. And this is one of the few times the Kohen uses his left hand. He picks up the container with his right hand, pours a little bit of the oil into his left hand, or I guess as much as he can hold, and then he dips his right finger into the oil and does the same three, puts it on the same three places. But again, he has to do it that way. He can't, if we go back to the first verse, which says, Zot toyet Torah Metzora, every one of these things, the Gemara tells us, every step of the way had to be precise, exact, and if it was done out of order, not exactly as prescribed, didn't help. You could have done everything right except miss one thing, and you had to go start all over again, which is again very reminiscent of the Avodah on Yom Kippur, where we have the same exact thing. The Gemara in Yoma tells us that the whole procedure of the Yom Kippur service, from the slaughtering of the par to the sprinkling of the blood to when the vidui was said, all of these had to be in a precise order. If you change the order, you had to start all over again. Didn't work. If you get anything out of order, it didn't work. If you did anything not precisely the way it was done, explained, it didn't work. Then, now another interesting thing, the Kohen then takes the leftover oil, okay, that's in his hand, that's in his left hand, and he puts it, on the head of the person who's getting, I guess he rubs it on the head of the person being cured, and that completes the process of what the Kohen is doing with the person. Then the Kohen retreats to the Beit HaMikdash. He brings the chatat, brings the olah, and again, remember we had three korbanot that were brought. One was an asham, one is a chatat, one is an olah. This is the first time on the wealthy person mentions that the other two kvasim were chatat and olah. One we mentioned was an asham. There's the chatat is the kivsa, the olah is the male, the female is the chatat, and he brings up the korbanot, and after he's brought the korbanot, the chiper alav hakohen v'taher. And now, finally, with the bringing of the korbanot, the Tzarua is now completed his process. He is now tahor to the extent that he can now enter into the Beit HaMikdash again. As we said, the entire process here is firstly to re-enter. The first week process is to get him back into society. Second week process is to get him back into the Beit HaMikdash so he can re-enter the Beit HaMikdash. And throughout all of this procedure, the purpose is to remind the tzarua, as we talked about last week, that he has to be in outside of the city in quarantine, is not to prevent the spread of the disease. It's to cause the person who has the tzara to reflect and to think about how he got into this situation and what he's done to cause this. This is the primary purpose of the re-establishing, is again to make sure that he doesn't forget and lose those lessons. He's got to continue on that course. And that's why I say the whole process here is a very precise process. Lots of things that, as I said, comparable to the para aduma and the sprinkling of the ashes of the para aduma, again, to remind us that when we come in contact with certain things that cause us to be distanced from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have to work hard at restoring that relationship. Just like we have to work at any relationship, if we've done something to ruin it, so to our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. However, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, while he wants us to go through this precise process, wants us to remember and realize that he has sent the Kohen out to be our guide, has sent the Kohen out to be our assistant in this process, to be our mentor in how to perform this process. Not the Kohen has done it, but the Kohen has been theoretically has learned all about the procedure, has learned why we go through this, has learned and understands the rationale behind all of this, and is going to share that with me. That as we're going through this process, it's not just the Kohen says, okay, come on here. The purpose of the Kohen is to be involved in the process as we're going through it. Excuse me, I don't know who's out there who's not on mute, but if you can mute, I can hear some noise in the background. I apologize. The Kohen has to go through this with you and be with you to the extent that he is explaining and helping you understand why you're going through this process. So if the Kohen himself doesn't understand it and hasn't been taught, he cannot be an effective advocate for you. Just like you can't have anybody, the concept that somebody who is not themselves committed to a Torah lifestyle or living an appropriate ethical lifestyle can be a proper role model, can be a proper teacher, is something that is completely foreign to Judaism. One of the great debates in, quote, liberal democratic societies is, can I separate the person from the teaching? And Judaism tells us you can't, because every teacher has to be a role model. And if they're not suitable to be a role model, we can't learn from them. And we see this, I think this is most poignantly pointed out in Talmudic stories of students who literally follow their teacher 24/7 to see how they act when they're not, quote, in the four walls of academia, to see what type of person they are, what type of life they live. And there are stories told of, some of the role models and the behavior they exhibited that helped them become such revered teachers. It wasn't just that they were great lecturers, but they were great people in terms of their ability to model and be role models and teach people through their own lives, not just through their lectures. Yes, David. Yes, David.
What you're explaining to us is a lot of items with quite deep symbolism, from what I can understand. Would the Kohen explain the symbolism of what he was doing to the people as he was treating them? Would they know what it was all about?
In theory, the answer is absolutely yes. That's the whole purpose of the procedure. The Kohen is supposed to be, when you came to the Beit HaMikdash and you had to bring a korban, it wasn't that, okay, here's my animal, here's that the Kohen said, do this, do this, do this, do this. The Kohen said, no, why are you coming to bring this korban? What is it you're trying to achieve? And he was supposed to be your spiritual guide as you're going through that process. Now, if the Kohen hadn't trained properly and hadn't had the right teachers, then that probably would have been challenging for him to do.
But does he have to explain, like when he dips the blood on the toe and the ear, etc., does he have to explain to the guy the symbolism of it?
I think he explains it before. In other words, it's like lahavdil, when you go to the doctor, okay, and the doctor tells you this is the treatment plan we're going to do. He doesn't explain it as he's doing the treatment. He explains it to you up front. So I would suspect that it would be the job of the Kohen to, as the person is coming, when he meets him, he talks to him, he explains, here's what we're going to do, here's why we're doing it. And then as we're doing it, the person is theoretically recalling what he's learned with the Kohen. So I would compare it almost to Pesach night, only because it's 2 weeks before Pesach. I got to compare something to Pesach, right? That we sit and we talk about, we're going to talk about how we're going to eat the matzah and we're going to eat the maror, and then we do it. We explain it all first. We don't explain the matzah and maror as we're sitting there with our mouthfuls trying to eat it. We explain it all before. Why are we eating matzah? Why are we eating maror? Why are we going through this leaning and reclining as we're eating and drinking? We explain all that before, and then we do it. And I think that has a much more powerful impact than just doing it. And I think that's true, by the way, in every mitzvah. We don't just we shouldn't be just. I mean, unfortunately, many people didn't have that, especially in the generation. I will say in the generation that proceeded and succeeded World War II, and in between World War I and World War II, there was a major disconnect in Jewish tradition, in the ability to transmit Jewish tradition because of the upheaval of communities and families. And there were many families who ran for their lives, and some got to safety and some didn't. And there was a major break in the chain, because part of the whole chain of Judaism, Tevye talks about, I quote Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof, who says, well, it's a tradition. Now, why do we do it? I don't know, but it's a tradition. But the answer is, up until that generation, Tevye, that's the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever, people knew, because they learned as they were going through the ritual, they were being taught by their parents, by their teachers, why we're doing this. It's only, as I said, in the 20th century, with the major upheavals of Jewish communities, that everything got lost again. Although it probably happened in the 16th century when Jews were fleeing from Spain, and that totally disrupted Jewish culture also. And it happened in the 11th century when the Babylonian academies dispersed and Jews had to go leave the Middle East and find new places. Periodically, where there are these major upheavals in Jewish wanderings and causing Jewish wandering, we have these breaks in the chain that have to be rebuilt. And they can only be rebuilt if we study before the fact. We can't sit there on Pesach night and expect to study and do it perfectly. It's like, the guy who goes in, didn't go to any of the classes, didn't listen to any of the lectures, never did the homework, shows up for the test and expects to ace the course. Well, you may be able to, but unless you knew it all before, it's not going to happen. So part of our course of being Jewish and practicing Judaism is studying it beforehand. This is why the halacha tells us, when it comes to Pesach, again, I'm using Pesach only because of the calendrical proximity. But with Pesach, the Gemara tells us that you have to start studying the laws of Pesach 30 days before, because there are so many laws to study. And if you don't study them, you won't know them when you get to Pesach, and you won't understand it. You won't get the same value and meaning out of it. And it's not just the technical laws, it's the understanding and the rationale behind those technical laws. And it's the same thing here. The Kohen is supposed to be your spiritual guide to returning to God, whether it's when you've had tzaraat, whether when you've come in contact with the dead and you're going through the process with of being sprinkled with the ashes of the paraduma, whether it's somebody going through Seder night, or somebody bringing any korban. I mean, one of the key things of Pesach in the time of the Beit HaMikdash was the bringing of the korban Pesach, and that is, that again is a whole procedure where if you've never witnessed it, did I just lose everybody? Hello, is everybody there? Anybody there?
Yeah.
Oh, you're still there? Okay, because my computer just told me I got logged out. Okay, I don't know why my computer's doing this. Okay, so the fact is that there are all of these things that cause us to reflect on what we're doing, so that we can effectively do what we need to do. So I'm confused. Okay, my computer is going cuckoo. I don't know if that's because of the internet connection here. Can everybody still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to continue and hope things work out okay. So basically, that's what I said. The Kohen has to be involved. He has to be educated about the process, the symbolism, because if he's not, you're never going to get it. Okay, and I think that's the whole lesson here, why I was focusing on the procedure, the process, and again, as we did last week, the key word being HaKohen throughout this whole procedure. The Kohen has to be involved and be able to teach you and lead you on your way back to God. And when we understand that, that's what Judaism is all about. It's about understanding what we're doing. Yes, we have to go through the motions. Yes, we have to do the things, but the more we understand about why and what we're doing, the more likely we are able to impact others, influence others, be a role model for not only ourselves and our families, but for fellow Jews. And ultimately, that's the role of the Jewish people, is to be an Or LaGoyim, to be a light for all of the world. And when we're able to do that, we can maybe celebrate Pesach in Yerushalayim and bring our Korban Pesach b'meher of Yameinu. So thank you all. Questions or comments? David, you still with me?
I'm still with you. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments that I didn't address?
No, it was very interesting. Thank
Marv,
you.
anything? Okay, thank you all. Have a good week. Next week, we're back to, I hope, Bezrat Hashem, Monday evening. And since next Shabbos is, there is no parshat Shavua, it'll be Chag. We will probably spend a little bit of time talking about Pesach in some aspect. I haven't yet figured out what, but it will probably be a much more, I don't know, hopefully interesting discussion about Pesach. Thanks all, and have a good
Good night.
evening. Laila Tov, and have a good week.